FINRA's Central Registration Depository System, or CRD, is the central licensing and registration system not just for FINRA, but also for all 50 states and U.S. securities exchanges. And it's the backbone of the BrokerCheck system, the free tool that allows investors to research the background of their brokers or financial firms. But the system is still partying like it's 1999. 20 years since its last update, CRD is getting a facelift. On this episode of FINRA Unscripted, Derek Linden tells us more. Welcome to FINRA Unscripted. From Rockville, Maryland, I'm your host, Caitlin Kiernan. I'm joined today by Derek Linden, FINRA's Executive Vice President of Registration and Disclosure, or RAD. Derek, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Caitlin.
Derek, we invited you here today to discuss a particular project your team is in the middle of implementing. But before we get to that, I wanted to take a step back and hear a little bit about your team. Registration and disclosure. Some people might wonder, who are we registering, what are we disclosing, and why we need to do so. So I was just wondering if you could go into a little bit of why is this an important part of FINRA's regulatory toolbox?
Well, it's interesting. If you're in the securities industry, you take for granted that everyone who's registered in the industry, every branch, and all the firms. It's just a given. That's because the CRD system, our central registration depository, collects all that information in one place. So we have information on roughly 640,000 registered representatives, almost 4,000 firms, and 156,000 branches. Over 85,000 industry users are entitled to access the CRD system and the information it has about firms, branches, and brokers.
So how did CRD come to be?
Before CRD, if you wanted to register as a broker, you had to file an application with the NASD, FINRA's predecessor, each state that you wanted to be licensed in each other SRO or exchange that you wanted to be registered with. This could be multiple applications, multiple checks, and it was a very complex process.
A lot of stamps, too, it sounds like.
A lot of stamps and very large Federal Express bills. The securities industry and its regulators recognized that this complex process needed to be fixed. FINRA, working with the SEC, state regulators, and the industry in a collaborative effort, came up with uniform registration forms that every regulator would use. And we developed the Central Registration Depository, or CRD system, to provide one-stop processing of applications, payments, and to be a single repository of the information about brokers, firms, and branches.
So today, FINRA maintains the system but works with these other organizations as well? Or how does that work?
FINRA is actually required by law to operate a registration system. We have an agreement with the North American Securities Administrators Association to operate the registration system for state regulators as well. FINRA works collaboratively with NASA to set the policies that govern the Central Registration Depository.
So earlier you mentioned that when CRD was first created, it created the uniform forms. Is that what the U stands for in U4 and U5?
Yes, the U stands for uniform. One of my early accomplishments was to take the dash out between U and 4. So we just have the Form U4 today instead of the original Form U-4.
A fun fact for us today.
When I first started working with CRD, I was told it was really a very simple system. A Form U4 application for registration gets you in, and a Form U5 termination application gets you out. The system is really much more complex than that.
What makes it more complex?
What that simple statement conceals is the fact that the U4 is now, with all its attachments, close to 40 pages long. What makes the system complex are all the different situations that can arise when you're dealing with an industry as complex as the securities industry. There are many brokers where it is a simple process of filing a U4, and when they leave the industry, filing a U5. But if there's disclosure information that has to be reported, the registration forms collect details about individuals, about their experience with regulators, law enforcement, financial responsibility, and other areas. Depending on a particular broker's circumstances, completing a Form U4 can be a quite challenging task, and the process of reviewing that information by regulators can be similarly challenging. Disclosure information can include criminal events, regulatory events, customer complaints, arbitrations and litigation, bankruptcies, and other financial information.
So for a broker who doesn't have any history of that, the U4 could presumably be an easier form to fill out than a broker who might have one or multiple events to disclose.
Yes, a broker who can answer no to all the disclosure questions has an easier task in completing their Form U4. But there's still significant information that's provided, including, for example, 10 years of employment history.
And what is the benefit of collecting this information when it comes to regulating the financial markets and when it comes to investors feeling confident in the markets in which they're investing?
There are so many professions where you don't know who's in the industry or who's licensed in the industry. If you're going to conduct a securities business in the United States, you have to be licensed. You have to be registered with FINRA, and you have to be licensed in one or more states. The CRD system lets industry and regulators find information about those individuals, firms, and branches. And we use the information from the CRD system in our BrokerCheck system, which allows investors to access online information about the broker they may be doing business with, firms they might be interested in, and other information.
So your team is in the middle of a multi-year initiative to transform the CRD system. So how is this a benefit, and why should listeners care?
The CRD system actually was initially started in the 1980s. It was a paper and pencil system with some automation of key information, but it didn't really become a fully online system until 1999, just before Y2K. And we're continued to use that system that was originally designed in 1999. The architecture of that system was state-of-the-art at the time, but in 20 years, technology has advanced dramatically.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. We've continued to make improvements in the legacy CRD system, and it's a reliable system and gets the job done today. Not that long ago, we celebrated the processing of the 50 millionth registration in the CRD system. So it's a very capable program, but it's not flexible the way modern applications are, and it's not designed to leverage cloud technology or modern open architecture solutions. This is an opportunity to use that technology and those open architecture solutions to deliver an easier system for users to get their work done.
And regular listeners will remember episode 12, Steve Randich was on the show talking about our move to the cloud. So it makes sense that now we're moving the system over to the cloud as well. And how will the cloud allow the system to be more nimble and advance the program?
When you look at technology, most of the technology to development today is in cloud-based applications and using our open architecture solutions. So that's the sweet spot in terms of innovation, better user experience, and more capable systems. By moving to the cloud, we will be able to take advantage of the cost and efficiency benefits of the cloud and the better user experience that open architecture solutions provide.
You mentioned that the old system went online in 1999. Is that related to Y2K?
Yes, it was. It's hard to imagine how much the industry was focused on Y2K, which after the fact really seemed to be a non-event. But at the time, FINRA and other organizations were very concerned about the potential impact of Y2K. In the case of CRD, this meant that the application had to be replaced with a completely new application.
When this transformation was announced last year, the press release said that the transformation was a part of FINRA 360. How so?
So FINRA 360 is FINRA's overall effort to examine our programs and look at ways that we can do things better. This is the way we do things better in the registration and disclosure area. We're highly technology enabled, and we couldn't process the volumes we have without a very capable technology solution. If we are going to improve the registration and disclosure experience for industry, regulators, and investors, we have to improve the underlying technology.
And so you mentioned earlier that 85,000 industry users use the system, so it seems like this transformation is an easy way to impact a large number of users as well.
That's absolutely right. The challenge today for users, and many of them are experienced users of the CRD system, so they've figured out its idiosyncrasies and how to get things done. But that involves a lot of knowledge about how the system works, and we want to make it easier for people to find out what they need to do and then do it. So today, for example, there are multiple queues that a industry user would go to determine what they have to do from a registration standpoint. One of the changes we've implemented is to provide an activities list that can be personalized that shows exactly what things they need to do in the system.
So your team just announced in February an update Can you walk us through what changed at that time?
The most recent changes to new CRD include better access to information about individuals. So today, in the legacy system, we provide a view of information about individual brokers. But that same view is provided to industry, state, and other users. And it's basically all the information about the individual. It doesn't necessarily meet the needs of each different user. So what you're able to do in the new system is present to industry users the information they think is most important and used most often. So you can go to the individual display, and instead of having to scroll through a series of different screens, you're able to see the information that you're most likely to use right away. So overall, this design change is how do we provide the information you need in fewer clicks?
So saving some time along the way.
That's right, and also improving compliance because there's less likely to be a misunderstanding about the information.
And how is FINRA working with firms as it undertakes some of these changes to the system?
Well, an important part of the transformation is that throughout this process, the legacy system is in full operation. We will not have you use legacy CRD on Friday and on Monday you come into a completely new experience. We intentionally structured this as a multi-year deployment so that individuals will not lose what they're currently able to use until they have a chance to adapt to the new program. We want to make it easier for industry users to get their job done in new CRD. This is a transformation of the user experience in the application. So what we want to do is be able to present more user-friendly screens, relevant information, so that they can get their job done. As we began the design of new CRD, we based that on extensive meetings with member firms and feedback from member firms in different ways, whether it's at conferences, meetings with firms, regional meetings with firms, walking through what are the pain points with the current system, what things would they like to see in terms of new CRD, where are areas where FINRA could make it easier for the firms to get their job done.
Do firms continue to have an opportunity to weigh in as they explore the new system?
Absolutely. One of the ways they can do that is to visit a webpage on finra.org, New CRD. They're able to email us suggestions, and they can get information about New CRD on that webpage.
Great. We'll include some links to those materials in our show notes. These changes that were announced in February, where are you in the process? Was that an initial change, or are you midway through?
At this stage, we've finished about 25% of our journey. We've delivered to the industry two features that they viewed as most important. One was an activities list so they can quickly figure out what they need to do in the system. And second is better access to information about individual brokers. And while we're transitioning to new CRD, we have to keep legacy CRD up and running. The industry, regulators, and investors depend on it every day. The deployment of Web CRD in 1999 was a replacement of an existing application. This meant that users used the old application in the beginning of August 1999. That application was turned off, and users began using Web CRD on August 16, 1999. It was a complete transition from one system to another.
That's a pretty hard date. Is that why this system is more of a multi-year process versus, we're turning it off on August 16th?
One clear rule of practice is you want to avoid doing that kind of big bang transition from one system to another wherever possible. That's the reason why we have a multi-year implementation of new CRD. This will allow us to keep the legacy CRD train running, to have all the registration work being done that is done today without hiccup while we introduce a new system and new functionality.
And I hear that you have a souvenir in your office to remind you of why it's a bad idea to have a distinct date and time that it all comes to an end.
When we were doing the Web CRD deployment, there was no possibility to extend time for delivery. We had the Y2K deadline that we were working to. So one of the members of our team purchased countdown clocks so we could keep track to the second how much time we had before we had to deploy Web CRD.
So is this like the TV show 24 where it's just constantly counting down every second, every day?
Absolutely. You never were in doubt as to how much time we had left to complete Web CRD.
Well, it's good to hear that the pressure is not on the same way for this transformation.
It's a different kind of pressure. We want to deliver as much new capability as we can to the industry, regulators, and investors.
What changes can users expect next?
Our next steps will be to continue to improve the user experience for the industry, to make changes to benefit state regulators and their user experience, And we'll also be making some major changes to the underlying technology. In 2019, we'll be moving the application from its on-premises database to a cloud location.
So you mentioned that state regulators use this database as well. How do they use it?
The CRD system not only provides the registration systems for FINRA, the SEC, and securities exchanges, it also delivers the registration systems that states use. Each regulator uses the CRD system to process its registration and other tasks. So, for example, a state regulator would use the system to review applications for state registration, to use the information in investigative and enforcement activities, and for other state programs.
We've talked a lot about the motivation behind the transformation, but how will it benefit investors beyond just benefiting firms?
Investors don't use CRD directly, but the information from CRD is used to populate the BrokerCheck system. BrokerCheck is a free service available to investors through FINRA's website. Investors can access BrokerCheck by going to brokercheck.com. Investors and other users of the BrokerCheck system conduct over 37 million searches in the system and view over 17 million summary pages with information about brokers every year. The changes FINRA is making in new CRD will make it easier to get information to investors more quickly.
And how will it benefit some of the other regulators that also use the system, like you mentioned, the states and other exchanges and the SEC?
All the different regulators who use new CRD have access to the same sorts of information about brokers, branches, and firms. However, each uses that information a little differently. One of the design features of new CRD allows us to provide each user with a more personalized access to the information that is important to them. For example, the information that a state regulator is most interested in about a broker may be different than the information that a firm is interested in. Using new CRD, we can present that information in the way each user prefers to see it.
How can firms stay up to date on what's happening and learn about new features when they roll out?
The best way for firms to keep up to date on what's happening with new CRD is to go to the FINRA website. A key part of the new CRD effort is extensive communication with users. We don't want people to be surprised by changes in the program. For firms, this includes in-person events, conference calls, webinars, one-on-one outreach, and the FINRA annual conference.
Well, that's it for today. Derek, thanks for joining us. We look forward to hearing more about the CRD transformation as it progresses. From Rockville, Maryland, I'm your host, Caitlin Kiernan. If you have any questions for future guests or ideas for future episodes, let us know. You can email us at finraunscripted@finra.org. Until next time.
Please note, FINRA podcasts are the sole property of FINRA, and the information provided is for informational and educational purposes only. The content of the podcast does not constitute any FINRA rule or amendment or interpretation of such rules. Compliance with any recommended conduct presented does not mean that a firm or person has complied with the full extent of their obligations under FINRA rules, the rules of any other SRO, or securities laws. This podcast is provided as is. FINRA and its affiliates are not responsible for any human or mechanical errors or omissions. Parties may not reproduce these podcasts in any form or reference them in any publication without the express written consent of FINRA.